By saying welcome. My name is Melinda Wenner Bradley, and I serve Philadelphia Yearly Meeting as the Youth Religious Life Coordinator on staff. I remember going to the Quaker College Fair and found my way to a Quaker college. I went to Bryn Mawr College from Westtown School, and I'm now the parent of three young people who identify as Quakers who they are looking at colleges. And I'm going to let everyone on the inside information that Jess Smith is one of my children's college counselors. So you are in such good hands this evening. I could not speak more highly of teacher Jess. Um, this is a kind of a rethinking of the Quaker College Fair. We're so delighted to be able to do it online and be able to invite a wider group of young people and their families to come and to learn more. So this evening is a conversation, an opportunity to ask questions of a real live college counselor. And Jess Smith is going to do her introductions last and open up that Q&A. Well then, Jess, why don't we give you the floor? Why don't you go ahead and do an introduction of yourself? If those other two folks show up, we'll invite them into our circle. But why don't you go ahead and
Wonderful.
do an introduction? Thank you.
Of course, thank you. Thanks for the time. So I'm Jess Smith. I'm Director of College Counseling at Westtown. So far, everyone we can see in the room is also connected to Westtown, which is great. So my emails are working. So this is I think my 6th year at Westtown and my 11th year in college counseling. I previously was a college counselor at Wilmington Friends School. So I have always worked with Quaker schools in college counseling. And before that, I was an English teacher. So I'm happy to answer. Christy, I know Anissa is your kid, right? Am I saying her name correctly? Great. Okay. So she's a sophomore. I'm happy to talk about any part of the process, 9th grade through 11th grade. Dane is almost as expert as I am at this point. So.
Okay, here we go. Here's our first question from Christy. Thanks, Christy, for your patience with the technology. So how do you guide your child if she's really stuck on one school? If you have a child who gets, I had that child, Christy, my oldest. So what do you do when someone is just fixated on one school, Jess?
Sure. So I would say, since right now you're the parent of a sophomore, I think as the parent of a sophomore, you just kind of smile and nod and just kind of say, okay, cool. Tell me more about that school. Why are you so interested in that? And then, have confidence. And I can say this because you're the parent of a Westtown student and I work at Westtown. Have confidence that in junior year, and Dane can attest to this as well, we really, really guide, I was going to say force, but let's go with guide students through looking at all kinds of different colleges. So regardless of who your student's college counselor is, that person will ask all kinds of questions. We have them do lots of questionnaires and students write us a letter of introduction. We do all these things. And if you're listening and your student is not at Westtown School, that's okay. So the big picture answer to your question is, if your student's really fixated on one school, as we know, sometimes teenagers can be a little stubborn. So I wouldn't try to change their mind. I would kind of leave it up to time. And also a little bit of practicality of, that's great, honey. I totally support that vision. Let's give it time. Oh my goodness, in 6th grade. And let's be sure to visit some other schools too, just in case. Because what I do see is students change a lot through the process, and students will come in when we start working with them in junior year, in January of junior year, with one idea and say, well, I really want this thing. And then by the spring or the summer or the fall, they've kind of evolved. So I give it time and, see if things change. And the other thing too, is it might be like, I'm kind of talking about just that general fixation. It might be that's a great school for her and she ends up going there and she knew what she wanted since 6th grade and that's okay too. And I'll also add, since you're the parent of a sophomore at Westtown, that we do offer the sophomores optional meetings with a college counselor in May. But that's after we get the seniors sorted. So again, you don't have to be the bad guy in this conversation. You can just say, hey, look, teacher Jess sent that email. You can go and sign up for a meeting with the college counselor. Why don't you go in? And that's a great time for us to give some guidance and to give some more suggestions. Yeah, great question.
Yes.
So,
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
I just want to say welcome to NK. Thank you. I don't know if that's the correct name to have there. I'm saying what I'm seeing on the screen, but welcome. We're glad to have you with us.
Yeah, NK is fine. Thank you.
Okay. So we are gathered, and Jess Smith is a college counselor at Westtown School and is answering general questions about the college process for folks who are here this evening. Am I allowed to like add something to what you said, Jess?
Please do.
I'm,
Yep.
you know, I'm not a college counselor, but I had a child who was entirely had one school she wanted to go to, and Christy, the other thing was we looked at other schools like that school. Schools, she wanted to go to a women's college, and so we looked at other ones that were sort of a similar kind of thing to give her some sense of at least some comparison within a similar kinds of things. And also what Jess is saying is so true, being able to rely on saying, talk to your college counselor about that, talk to your like it is so helpful to have the college counselors to be that voice. Sometimes it's harder to hear something from your parent than it is from another trusted adult in your life. I don't know if Dane's nodding a little bit like, yeah, that's true. Other questions or just something else that's risen for you that you might want to share?
So I just want to add, even though it's just high school, my daughter's a 10th grader at Westtown. And she went to several schools, but she kept on saying she wanted it to be Westtown.
That's great.
That was her choice all along. So I would just say, like teacher Jess said, don't be the bad guy, but just walk along with them, and it's either it's gonna be that school or something will just pop up. But don't be. I think sometimes when you discourage, it gives them more reason, more reason to you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, we all do.
Yes.
We're with you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
You.
Other questions, other thoughts?
Christy's put another question in the chat. I'm going to read
great.
it out.
Sorry, I missed that.
Yeah, no, that's my job. For the SAT and the ACT, do students have an option to take one or both from like as a mock exam? Do they practice?
Sure. So again, at least at Westtown, all the 10th graders took the pre-ACT about a month ago, and they'll be getting those scores back. The pre-ACT is basically practice. For anyone listening who's not a Westtown student or the parent of a Westtown student, you can certainly take free practice ACTs or SATs with any test prep company. At Westtown, we use Revolution Prep. You can use Kaplan, Princeton Review, Back to Basics, like any of those test prep companies will happily give you, you'll have to listen to their sales pitch as well, but they'll happily give you a free practice SAT or ACT. And very often your student, you don't even need to go somewhere. They can take it at home on their computer with an online proctor. And then all juniors at Westtown, and this is true probably of, I don't know, 95% of American high schools, all juniors at Westtown and most juniors in the US take the PSAT in junior year in October, which is for most students a practice SAT. The only thing those scores are used for besides practice is if your student scores really high, they might be eligible for a national merit scholarship, which sounds fancy and people know a lot about it. But in the end, it's generally a scholarship of maybe $2,000 or $3,000. It's not, which is definitely helpful. It's not nothing. It's not a life-changing amount of money. So I'm sorry to say, when the college tuition can be $70,000 a year or more. So, so for Westtown students, they will do both. For practice tests, if you just want your students to take practice tests on their own, just to practice, or if they don't happen to go to Westtown, then you can find those either in books, the old-fashioned way, the way we did it back in the day, or online. You can find free practice tests through test prep companies. While we're on the subject, I'm happy to take any questions, but I'm also happy to talk about test optional, which is a question that a lot of people have. So should we talk about that? Okay. Dane, this is a little bit of a preview of junior seminar this week, unless you already had it. And one of the topics in junior seminar this week is test optional admissions. It's a thing, okay? So, so test optional admissions is a possibility. In fact, it's been a possibility for about 30 years at some colleges, including many of the Quaker colleges. So right now, Haverford is test optional, Bryn Mawr is test optional, Guilford and Earlham are both test optional, and all of those, what that means is they don't require the SAT or ACT. So if you or your student is not the greatest test taker, or you're the student and you're not so great at taking tests, that means that you apply without your test scores. So then for people who aren't familiar with this, the logical question is, well, then what, like, how do they make a decision? What are they looking at? And Dane could tell you that the most important part of your college application is the transcript. So colleges are looking at what grades the student earned in high school and then what classes they took to earn those grades. That's always the most important part. So if your student has a strong transcript, if they're earning A's and B's and taking, appropriately challenging courses, then the test score might not add a whole lot to that. So they might be a good candidate for test optional. So all those schools I mentioned that are test optional, we'll talk about NK. That's a great question. We'll talk about that in a second. All those schools I talked about that are test optional are test optional separate from the pandemic. Since 2020, there's something like 1,800 colleges that are test optional. We don't know if all of them will continue to be for the current 10th and 11th graders. We don't know anything about what's coming for the 9th graders, but know that it's a very strong possibility. So NK asked about Westtown and AP classes. We actually don't offer any AP classes at Westtown. And that is a tremendous benefit that we have, because the AP curriculum is very much kind of in the box kind of curriculum. It focuses on memorization and kind of memorizing and then spitting out a whole lot of information without analyzing it or writing about it or doing an experiment about it. So we don't have any AP classes, and I'm really happy about that. What we do have at Westtown are advanced courses. And those are offered in a much broader range of subjects than the AP covers. Students can at Westtown take AP exams, and they typically go with, so we have advanced courses. Advanced courses are our honors courses at Westtown. I see your question, Christy. So some students do take AP tests after, like calculus is the most popular AP tests that students take. I see Dane nodding. Sometimes students will take them in language or science or US history. So students can take the test, but we don't have specific AP classes at Westtown. And this gets to something else. And again, I don't know if all the people in the room, we have a lot of Westtown people here tonight, but I don't know if all of you are from Westtown. So if you just got here and you want to put your information in the chat, like who you are and where you're from, we would love that. And then the last thing I would say is that colleges evaluate students in the context of their high school. So when colleges look at students from Westtown, where we don't have AP classes, they're not saying, oh, you didn't take any AP classes, because they know that we don't have any. Okay. If your student goes to a high school where AP classes are offered, colleges might expect them to take a few of those. So that's a really important thing, that you're being evaluated on what you did with what you had in your high school. So if your high school doesn't offer advanced biology, you wouldn't be expected to take that. Okay, or if your high school doesn't offer Chinese, for instance. Great. So I'm going to stop there. I've been talking a lot to see if there are other questions.
Dane, do you have any? Yeah, go ahead, Dane. Go ahead and unmute. Yeah. And then Christy has, after Dane, Christy has another question in the chat.
Great.
So I've visited a lot of like liberal arts colleges around the Northeast, and I've been feeling that they feel a lot like similar to Westtown, but I haven't gotten a chance to see any like Quaker specific colleges. So do you think is there big differences between like a typical liberal arts college and a liberal arts Quaker, historically Quaker college?
Sure, I think that's a good question. I think it depends on how the Quakerness plays out. And Melinda, I'd love to hear what you think about this question too. So I'll say a little bit and then I'll toss it back to you. But so I went to a college, a small liberal arts college, Mount Holyoke. It's a women's college that is not a Quaker school, but it did have an honor code. And a really big part of our honor code was having self-governed exams, which meant that when it was time to take a final exam, you would go to a place and pick up your exam, and you could take it anywhere on campus. You could take it in an empty classroom or in your dorm room or the library. You could take it anywhere, and there wasn't a teacher there watching you, because the idea of the honor code there was that you would be honorable, you wouldn't cheat on that exam. So you could sit and take the exam and your history book would be beside you, but you were expected not to cheat. And as far as I know, no one ever did, because we took the honor code really, really seriously. And I know at Haverford, which is a historically Quaker college, they have a really similar thing, and that connects back to their Quaker values, but that's not like an exclusively Quaker idea. Does that make sense? So I think you'll find some things are similar, and I would look for things like students being involved in the governance of the school, meaning they get to make important decisions along with faculty and staff and administration. Like they get to make some decisions about budget and programming and things like that. I would look for some kind of honor code, which is certainly prevalent at many colleges, and even some larger ones. UVA has a really strong honor code. And then I, kind of look at the colleges. One of the things we talked about in class is looking at colleges' mission statements that will actually give you a snapshot of their values for sure. So those are just some of the things that I think about. What would you say, Melinda?
Yeah, so I went to Bryn Mawr College but I majored at Haverford. So I spent a lot of time over at Haverford. And both schools, because they're sort of sibling schools, Bryn Mawr also had an honor code. It's a women's college. So, I had a lot of friends who went to Earlham College, which is a Quaker college out in Indiana. And my sister went to Guilford College, which is a Quaker college in North Carolina. And I would say that, there's in some ways, there isn't an awful lot that is different. Many liberal arts colleges have a real social activism as a big part of their campus life. Some of those things. But I think in addition to what teacher Jess said, kind of looking at the history of the school, and in a way that kind of grounds what the values of the school are. And things, there are different things that then get kind of, Haverford, Swarthmore. Oh, and my dad went to Swarthmore, but a bajillion years ago. It doesn't count anymore. They both have Quaker collections, and so there's some interesting historical stuff that's there. And they, some of those things still sort of are part of the ethos and the feeling of the campus. You're not going to be required to go to a meeting for worship. That may be good news. At a Quaker college is very different, but there will be a relationship often to a Quaker meeting, that if that's something that's been meaningful to you at Westtown, or that you just find every once in a while is useful or comforting to you, that's there. So they're kind of as different from each other as any of the other liberal arts colleges are, but they often have something sort of about what grounds them and who they are and what their values are as a school, and the kinds of decisions then that they make about things. Christy asked in the chat, how many colleges should students apply to overall?
Sure. So I would say it depends, and it depends is the most common answer to any college counseling or admissions question. So it depends on the student. We have students who apply sometimes to just one college. If they apply somewhere, early decision and are admitted, or if they apply somewhere relatively, so there's early decision when you're promising to attend that school if you're admitted. And then early action, you apply early, but you're not making any promises. So the nice thing about that is the student gets their decision relatively early. So sometimes we have students who apply one of those early ways to one or just a few colleges. For early decision, you can only do one, but for early action, you could do a few, depending on what the college offers. And they apply to just a few and they're done and everything's great. Sometimes we have students apply to more, and it really kind of depends. It's different for every student's college search. In general, I like to say 5 to 8 is a good number for most students. It might be fewer if they're applying to just a few schools and they're very confident of admission to a couple of those schools, and they know what they want and they're really focused on that, and that's okay. I've seen fewer students at that low end since 2020 because students haven't gotten to visit as often as they did pre-pandemic. I hope for a Danes class and for younger students, that's becoming more possible again as people feel a little better about traveling sometimes. I know it depends on your situation. And then I think more than about 8 or 10 gets to be a lot of work for the student, depending on the kinds of colleges they're applying to. It's additional essays. And then I think it's also, again, depending where they're applying, if they're applying to a ton of super selective schools, unfortunately, it's not like buying lottery tickets. It's not like if you apply to all the Ivies, you're more likely to get into them. You could be denied by all of them. And that's a ton of rejection for students to deal with. Or you could apply to like 8 schools that aren't super selective, but you're not really interested in. And then you could have all these schools you're admitted to and have to just think a lot more and do a lot more decision making in the spring of senior year. The other thing to consider is that in general, most schools charge an application fee. Some colleges do not. Very often, we've talked about women's colleges a few times. Many of the women's colleges no longer charge an application fee. I feel like perhaps Haverford does not, but I'd have to double check on that. So, but for the colleges that do charge an application fee, and that's most of them, that's $50, $60, sometimes $70 per college. So 10 colleges, that's $500. That's a lot. So at Westtown, since we're still kind of on this Westtown mode for the moment, at Westtown, we do have support for students who get 75% or more financial aid at Westtown. We give those students fee waivers, which means they don't have to pay those application fees, which is a big benefit. And don't worry if you forget about this and you're a Westtown student or parent, we know who you are and we will find you and tell you you're entitled to a fee waiver. So to sum up, I think 5 to 10 is a good number for most students. I think more than that is more work, more stress, and more money for those application fees. And fewer than that sometimes might mean that you're kind of limiting your options, but that could be okay depending on the student.
Jess, I had another random thought in
Yeah.
response to Dane's question, which was, um, Quaker colleges will often have specific programs, Dane, that are kind of leadership incubators. And I mean, not to say that that doesn't happen again at other liberal arts colleges, but, um, you know, Guilford has a really good Quaker leadership program. I know that there's that kind of thing at Haverford as well. And in some ways, like, you're not going to go out and be a Quaker leader, maybe, but it's a way of nurturing leadership that is the kind of leadership that like the world kind of needs. So in the same way that, not every student at Westtown is a Quaker student, very few are really, but you're getting the kind of education that we know you're going to go and be people who help change the world. And so there's a little bit of that same kind of thing in programs that really nurture that.
Mhm.
I forgot to say that before.
Yeah, and I'd also expect stronger links to like Quaker nonprofit organizations and friends organizations and you know peace studies and kind of similar peace and justice studies sometimes, things like that, like things that kind of take a uniquely Quaker view, maybe not uniquely but distinctly Quaker view on the world. So
And there were more Quakers who were in the sciences and business than you might imagine. There actually are a lot of people, like the doctor who invented Listerine was a Quaker, Mr. Lister. So there actually are often a lot of science. The sciences are actually quite strong at a place like Haverford as well.
Mhm.
NK has rejoined us. Welcome back. I'm not sure what the other two Becker Richies. We're coming up to 7:30, so I just want to invite. These have been really great questions. Other questions that folks have. We're gonna make sure we're done because Jess has another meeting to be to. We're gonna be done by 7:40 at the latest. So, inviting other questions.
I did have a quick question.
Yeah.
Teacher just talked about the 5 to 10 schools
Mhm.
to apply, and I'm wondering whether the counselors will guide the students regarding like stretch schools and safe schools, so the kids don't pick schools that
Mhm.
it's gonna be a stretch to get in.
For sure. So again, I don't know if everyone here is from Westtown, but at Westtown, it starts in junior year when we begin meeting with students. And part of that initial meeting is looking at the students' transcripts from Westtown, or if they happen to attend a previous school for 9th or 10th grade, we look at that as well. And then the colleges that we recommend to students, some of them will be easier admits, some of them will be more difficult for the student to gain admission, some will be in the middle, but that starts from the beginning. So we're suggesting colleges that will be appropriate to that student. And then at the end of junior year, we send parents and students a letter saying, you know, these are the colleges you're looking at. Hello, this is your list sorted by reach and mid-range and likely options. So we definitely give students that guidance at Westtown. If you're not at Westtown, and I apologize for this evening being such a Westtown commercial, but if you're at a different place, you can look. I would encourage you to take advantage of whatever school counseling or college counseling is available at your school. And then you can get a sense of colleges' admission rates by looking online. I would use those, I would take all of those with a grain of salt because those are self-reported statistics. And I'm sorry to say that some colleges really love to stretch their statistics to make themselves seem more elite than they are. But they will give you kind of a ballpark estimate of the difficulty of admission. So to sum up, at Westtown, we work with students to find a range of appropriate schools. If you're not at a school like Westtown, you can also look at colleges' admission statistics, and they also publish their average admitted GPA, their average admitted test scores. And in general, you're looking for your students to be close to those ranges for the colleges for them to be admitted. And if they're really below that, then they might not be admitted. And it's okay to have a couple of colleges that are a stretch on the list, but you know, for student mental health and happiness, we want to keep that to, you know, maybe 2 or 3 as opposed to like 10 colleges that are reaches.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Of course, thank you, NK. I'd also say, you know, if you do not have a student at Westtown School, I think that the big thing is there are lots of great books out there about college admissions. I actually happen to have one on my desk. So this is called Who Gets In and Why by Jeffrey Salingo. There's another one that I have. I won't stand up and go, but it's over there in that bookshelf. And that one is called Where You Go Is Not Who You'll Be. I'm putting the name in the chat. And that is by Frank Bruni, who writes for the New York Times. And this one is called Who Gets In and Why? Jeffrey Go. Pardon my typing mistakes, but these are two great books, very reassuring, but really helpful. I'd say the Where You Go is not who you'll be. It's right there in the title. And basically the thesis of the book is that you can have a great college experience at a big range of colleges, many more than we think of when we say like a good college. So, and then he's got evidence to support this. He's not just making an argument because it's his opinion. Every chapter is full of stories and anecdotes and data on, you know, the effect that a student's college choice has on their life. And it's more about what they actually do when they're there, not just about going to a particular school. And then the Who Gets In and Why, I would call this like more advanced college admissions reading. And the reason for that is this book really gets into the nitty-gritty of how colleges make their admissions decisions. And the author goes to Davidson College, Emory, and I can't remember the other ones, but in shadows, I want to say UPenn maybe, and shadows their admissions staffs to kind of get the inside scoop. And that's really helpful. So if you're not at Westtown and you're looking for some resources, those are great ones. And then the other thing I would say is as much as you are comfortable, you can visit colleges. And if you're not comfortable or you just can't do that yet, every single college has online college admissions information sessions and virtual tours. So there's tons and tons of stuff online that you and your student can check out when they're ready. And if they're in 9th and 10th grade and they're not ready yet, that's okay. I'd say in junior year, it's time to start nudging them. So those are just some parting thoughts. If you're not someone from Westtown School, we have a lot of us here tonight, but.
Thanks for thinking of that and widening our circle, Jess. Thank you.
Of course.
All right, we need to let teacher Jess go. She is somewhere else that she is needed. So if you want to go, teacher Jess, maybe we'll just ask Becca if there's more to share about what's coming up with the Quaker College Fair and other pieces that are coming up in the next week or so. So thank you so much, teacher Jess.
Yeah, thank you so much. Have a great evening.